For generations, the American public has been fascinated by the mystery of unidentified flying objects. We have been conditioned by Hollywood films, science fiction novels, and ambiguous government reports to believe that any aircraft operating without visible propellers, jet exhaust, or loud combustion engines must originate from a distant galaxy. We are told that the physics of anti-gravity and propellantless propulsion are theoretical impossibilities that lie thousands of years in the future. But if you dig beneath the layer of military denials and look into the forgotten archives of mid-century American laboratory research, you discover a deeply guarded secret. Human beings solved the riddle of electro-gravitics nearly a century ago on American soil. The story of this suppressed scientific revolution revolves around a brilliant, quiet, and deeply dedicated American physicist named Thomas Townsend Brown. Born into a wealthy, prominent family in Zanesville, Ohio, in 1905, Brown possessed an innate, insatiable curiosity about the hidden forces of the universe. Unlike the academic establishment of his era, which treated Albert Einstein's theories as an unalterable religious dogma, Brown was a hands-on experimenter who believed that the true nature of space, time, and electricity had barely been scratched upon the surface. His journey into the forbidden zones of physics began in the early 1920s, while he was still a young student experimenting with primitive X-ray equipment in his private home laboratory. Brown noticed a strange, persistent anomaly that defied the laws of classical mechanics. Whenever he applied a massive high-voltage electrical charge to a highly specialized vacuum tube, the heavy tube would experience a physical force. It would twitch, surge, and attempt to move in a specific direction, completely independent of any external force or physical push. Sensing that he had stumbled upon a fundamental, undiscovered link between electricity and gravitation, Brown dedicated his academic career to mastering this phenomenon. While studying at Denison University, he partnered with his physics professor, Dr. Paul Alfred Biefeld. Together, the two researchers carefully documented and perfected the anomaly, defining a brand new scientific principle that would permanently bear their names in the underground annals of alternative science, the Biefeld-Brown effect. The core of their discovery was remarkably elegant but profoundly disruptive to standard engineering logic. Brown proved that if you build a high-density electrical capacitor and charge it with immense direct current voltage, the capacitor will naturally generate a highly localized asymmetrical field. The device will experience a continuous, directional thrust toward its positive pole. In simple terms, Brown had discovered that a sufficient concentrated electrical field could warp the immediate gravitational environment around an object. He had created a machine that could move itself through space using nothing but pure electrical energy. It required no fuel, no moving parts, no wings, and no exhaust. It was a silent, self-contained propulsion system that pulled itself forward by manipulating the fabric of space itself. As Thomas Townsend Brown moved out of the university classroom and into private industrial laboratories, his designs grew larger, more sophisticated, and incredibly efficient. By the early 1950s, he had advanced from simple laboratory capacitors to constructing small, aerodynamically designed disc-shaped craft. These discs, measuring roughly 2 to 3 feet in diameter, possessed no engines with moving parts, and absolutely no fuel tanks. Instead, their entire outer hulls were engineered as highly sophisticated, multi-layered electrical plates. In a series of tightly guarded private demonstrations conducted in front of high-ranking military officials and corporate aviation executives, Brown proved the validity of his technology. When he applied a staggering charge of up to 50,000 volts to the discs, they would rise silently into the air, hover with absolute stability, and accelerate around a central tether at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. The craft moved through the air with an eerie, frictionless ease, generating a faint bluish corona glow and a soft humming sound as they ionized the surrounding atmosphere. Brown had effectively demonstrated the working physics of what the public would soon call a flying saucer, using nothing more than advanced electrical manipulation. The military-industrial complex took notice of Brown's research, but not in the way the idealistic young physicist had originally hoped. Representatives from the United States Air Force and major defense contractors like the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio quickly stepped in, placing a heavy shroud of national security classification over his entire operation. Project Winterhaven, a comprehensive technical proposal submitted by Brown to develop a full-scale supersonic anti-gravity fighter jet, was quietly absorbed into the dark budget programs of the emerging deep state. From that exact moment, Thomas Townsend Brown was effectively displaced from his own scientific legacy. The official scientific community, funded heavily by federal grants and corporate energy endowments, suddenly began to ridicule his published work, writing off the Biefeld-Brown effect as nothing more than a minor aerodynamic phenomenon caused by ion wind or air movement. They claimed that his electrogravitic propulsion could never function in the vacuum of space, willfully ignoring his private laboratory tests that proved the thrust persisted even when the capacitors were sealed inside high vacuum chambers. While the public was told that anti-gravity was a scientific impossibility, Brown's notebooks, experimental data, and proprietary manufacturing techniques were quietly transferred to classified black-budget aerospace programs. For the rest of his life, Brown was forced to watch from the sidelines as his revolutionary discoveries were buried deep within the defense matrix, hidden away from the civilian world to ensure that human transportation remained permanently dependent on fossil fuels and archaic jet propulsion. The technological fallout of Thomas Townsend Brown's displacement became visible to the public decades later, though the system took great care to ensure the average citizen would never connect the dots. In the late 1980s, the United States military unveiled the B-2 Advanced Technology Bomber, a highly classified multi-billion-dollar stealth aircraft that featured a striking wing-like design that defied traditional aerodynamic standards. While the Pentagon officially claimed the B-2 was powered entirely by conventional General Electric jet engines, aviation whistleblowers and independent aerospace engineers noticed a series of highly unusual technical anomalies. The leading edges of the B-2 bomber's wings were engineered with a highly specialized, conductive material designed to carry an immense, high-voltage positive electrical charge. Simultaneously, the massive exhaust streams from its engines were heavily ionized with a negative charge. To anyone familiar with Thomas Townsend Brown's declassified 1950s patents, the blueprint was unmistakable. The B-2 bomber was utilizing a highly sophisticated, military-grade adaptation of the Biefeld-Brown effect, using electro-gravitics to flatten the air resistance in front of the craft, eliminate its sonic boom, and drastically reduce its operational weight. The technology was real, it was functional, and it was flying through the skies. But it was restricted exclusively to the machinery of global warfare. The economic implications of keeping this field of physics locked inside the military-industrial complex are staggering. For the last 80 years, the entire global infrastructure has been built around the combustion of fossil fuels and the maintenance of massive, fragile electrical grids. Working-class families spend a massive portion of their lifetime earnings simply paying for the energy required to move their vehicles from point A to point B, or to keep their homes livable. We have been trained to accept that high shipping costs, expensive airfare, and volatile oil prices are the immutable laws of human civilization. But Thomas Townsend Brown proved that the universe provides a completely different model. If electrogravitic propulsion had been openly developed for the civilian market, the entire concept of modern transportation would have been radically revolutionized. We would be living in a world with silent, emission-free vehicles that require no roads, no fossil fuels, and no costly mechanical maintenance. The cost of transporting food, medical supplies, and consumer goods would have collapsed to near zero, triggering an era of unprecedented economic abundance for the average household. By classifying this science under national security mandates, the ruling establishment did not just hide an advanced propulsion system, they actively suppressed an entirely new economic paradigm that would have permanently broken the power of the central banks and energy cartels. As Thomas Townsend Brown advanced into his twilight years, he found himself trapped in the ultimate paradox of the mid-century American scientist. He was an honorable man who had spent his youth believing that uncovering the deeper harmonies of nature would naturally elevate his country and liberate mankind. Instead, he had to live through a reality where his brilliance was harvested to construct the invisible cage of the deep state. He spent his final decades working quietly under corporate contracts, forbidden from speaking openly about his finest achievements, while the academic textbooks continued to teach young, aspiring minds a neutered version of physics that intentionally omitted the electrogravitic link. When Brown passed away in 1985, his name was largely absent from the major scientific journals and historical textbooks that celebrated the achievements of the atomic age. The official narrative had done its job with surgical precision, painting him as a fringe hobbyist who simply miscalculated the effects of ordinary laboratory physics. But the thousands of pages of classified reports hidden within the archives of Project Winterhaven tell a very different story. They reveal a man who was treated with the highest level of caution and security by the United States intelligence apparatus, a man whose mind possessed a key that could dismantle a multi-trillion-dollar global infrastructure. For the generation of Americans who have spent their lives watching the steady decline of genuine national liberty and the rise of all-powerful corporate governance, the story of Thomas Townsend Brown strikes a deeply resonant and sobering chord. It reminds us that the corporate political establishment is completely terrified of true scientific independence. They do not want an energy source or a propulsion system that they cannot meter, tax, control, and restrict. They prefer a population that is perpetually bound to the earth, paying a daily premium for the privilege of basic mobility, while the technology to unlock the open skies remains safely locked behind the high concrete walls of classified military installations. The legacy of the Biefeld-Brown effect stands as a permanent indictment of our modern, controlled economic reality. The answers to humanity's most pressing struggles, from the crushing weight of daily fuel expenses to the ecological decay of our planet, were pulled out of the cosmic background generations ago by an honest American engineer from Ohio. The science did not fail us. The institutions we trusted to protect our future chose instead to weaponize it for empire and hide it from the very citizens who funded its discovery. But as the system's grip begins to fray under the weight of its own greed, the truth remains waiting in the shadows, ready for a generation that refuses to accept the artificial limits of a stolen sky.